Royal Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking His Highness Sheikh Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa for his remarks last night and for his co-hosting of our opening dinner, where we had an excellent keynote address by Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the EU Commission, and a spirited conversation afterwards. This morning, we begin with our first plenary session. A reminder that these plenary sessions are on the record, but they're on the record also for those who make interventions or questions from the floor, so you have to exercise your own self-discipline in order to protect your own reputations as much as the speakers here with formal responsibilities need to do so. I'll be asking each of the speakers in the order in which they appear on the program to give us some remarks from the podium, and then they'll return to their chair, and once all of them have spoken, I'll take some questions and interventions from the floor and then come back to the panel for them to provide their responses to those questions and interventions. A technical detail, which is that we're very well equipped in this room. Absolutely everybody in the room has their own microphone, and the way the system works is that if you put your badge into the microphone in the slot on the right-hand side, your name will appear in front of you. And if you wish to take the floor or seek my attention, you press the microphone button. Your microphone will turn green. But that doesn't mean it's actually on. Only I can turn your microphone on. When I call on you, I'll turn your microphone on and then move on to the next. So that helps to ensure that I know exactly everyone who seeks the floor and can call you out by name and usually nationality too, which helps our speakers position their responses with all the diplomatic grace with which they're familiar and used to. So with those, what the Americans would call mildly filibuster remarks, in order to make certain that I will have brought the hall to full attention, let me invite to speak in our first plenary session on the changing geopolitics of energy, a issue that is of global significance as a result of the war happening in Europe, and for which we need international perspectives. And it's a real delight for me to invite to speak first Sheikh Salem Abdullah Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, recently appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kuwait. Since our very first Manama dialogue in 2004, Kuwait has been an active and committed participant in this defense dialogue, so I'm delighted that Sheikh Salem is with us today, and could I invite him to make his remarks on the podium. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to try and come across as an energy expert, but I'm not. I just took my position as minister a few weeks ago, and I'm versed in diplomacy, so here goes. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Chipman, for your very generous and kind introduction. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to the Kingdom of Bahrain and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, of course, for hosting this important annual dialogue on the challenges confronting our region. Today's plenary, with my esteemed colleagues, the Right Honorable James Cleverly and His Excellency Waleed Khuraiji, comes at a critical juncture. The changing geopolitics of energy, the title of today's session, summons to mind both the immediate and long-term challenges that confronts us all. The intensifying war in Ukraine, tensions and flashpoints in Asia, stalled negotiations in Vienna, deteriorating conditions in Afghanistan, a tenuous security situation in Yemen, Libya, Iraq, and across many parts of our region. That's a very worrying picture. Distinguished guests, the state of Kuwait is nestled in the very heart of a vital, resource-rich region that has seen its share of instability. In this turbulent region and beyond, the state of Kuwait has long played its role in safeguarding regional and global political and energy stability. We have borne witness to the interconnectivity of markets and the collective nature of security. Ripples in Crimea lead to tsunamis in Cambridge and Massachusetts. No region is immune to the consequences of conflict. And energy prices, unfortunately, march forward to the beat of war drums. It is precisely for this region that de-escalation and dialogue are vital. And in this regard, the recent US-China summit is a very positive and welcome development for global stability. It is then incumbent on us to foster further dialogue that serves to abate the challenges we face together. The state of Kuwait will continue to play its role in resolving crises through peaceful means. In addition to the geopolitical events, we need to also consider two fundamental factors that exacerbate the energy security outlook. First, a looming recession. The writing has been on the wall. Our experts and yours share similar assessments, which is what prompted collective action by all producing nations to prepare ourselves for this recession, and also to prepare investors and consuming nations for what the markets will bear in 2023. Decisions of this nature are not political. They are existential. And secondly, aggravated energy supply chains. There needs to be greater investment in both upstream and downstream operations by all of us. Aging and retired oil refineries will only limit our ability to place the guardrails that protect both producing and consuming nations. Distinguished guests, on the affairs of energy security, one cannot overlook its grave implication on the climate. I quote one of the leaders who has long championed this cause, and I quote, "Climate change poses an even greater existential threat to the extent that we have to put ourselves on what might be called a warlike footing." End of quote. That was a quote by His Majesty King Charles III. There should be no doubt about this. Climate change is a cross-border, intergenerational threat. Critical commitments were secured at the Paris Agreement and COP summits, including Kuwait's goal for carbon neutrality in our oil and gas sectors by 2050, with the aim of complete carbon neutrality by 2060. As recently pledged at COP 27 in Cairo, we will adhere and stick to our commitments very, very seriously. Distinguished guests, here we meet at the nexus of climate change, security, and prosperity. As our brothers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have persistently warned many years back, we simply cannot focus on the climate aspect alone without considering both energy security and economic prosperity. Elements of these very delicately balanced scales. The question was starkly posed as, do we freeze in the dark of today or burn under the sun in the creeping future? When addressing this, one ought to emphasize the fragility of the energy markets and energy transition, its effects on global economy, and the implications on the less affluent nation and peoples, and the consequences, of course, of geostrategic threats. Excellencies and distinguished guests, as energy markets brace for what is to come, as conflicts intensify and the global recession looms, as families gather this winter seeking warmth and comfort, let us unite. For it is through our friendship that we flourish, and through our partnership that we prosper. Thank you very much.
Sheikh Salem, thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a very long-standing relationship with this region, and I recall in 2014, both Philip Hammond and Michael Fallon were here to sign the Naval Facilities Agreement, so it's a delight to have Foreign Secretary Cleverly with us here today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. When Britain first opened our embassy here in Bahrain, our diplomats could look directly over the waters of the Gulf and watch the dhows carrying the pearl divers to the northern oyster beds. And yet today, our embassy is almost half a mile from the coast, not because it has moved, but because Bahrain has moved the sea by reclaiming land that once lay beneath the waves. And all around us, the Arabian Peninsula has experienced one of the swiftest transformations in history, wrought by the power of hydrocarbons, allowing spectacular cities to rise from empty deserts and entire countries to achieve prosperity, great prosperity, within a single lifetime. Now, the lesson I draw from that is that when our friends in the Gulf, and indeed the wider region, decide to make change happen, they can reinvent themselves and indeed reinvent their economies at a quite astonishing speed. And now, another transformation is beginning. And I believe that it will be an equally momentous one and be filled with opportunities as this region remakes itself by harnessing the power of sunlight and of the wind and of nuclear energy. And so as you embark upon this journey, I want to assure you that the United Kingdom will remain a steadfast friend and partner committed to our relationships in the Middle East and North Africa for the long term, and do so by building on centuries of tradition and friendship. Because we know that our security is your security, and your security is our security. And that any crisis here would have inevitable global repercussions. And we know that prosperity, so that your prosperity is our prosperity, and that our prosperity is your prosperity. And that's symbolized by the ever greater flow of trade between us, including over £44 billion worth of trade between the UK and the GCC. And we welcome regional initiatives to reinforce stability, including the historic Abraham Accords, of which the UK is a committed supporter. And Britain is convinced that we will only be able to overcome the mutual threats and seize the opportunities in front of us by cooperating even more closely than we already do. And that's why we're negotiating a free trade agreement with the GCC, which I remind the room is the UK's fourth biggest export market after the EU, the United States of America, and China. And that's why we're providing development finance through the British International Investment, including $500 million to Egypt and $250 million to Morocco so far. And that's also why we're deepening our security partnerships with Jordan and Oman and strengthening our cooperation with regional finance centers against illicit money. And that's also why we want to be with you on our shared transition to green energy, ensuring that we all benefit from renewable technologies that are not only practical, but are increasingly affordable, and also promise near total energy security. So last year we hosted COP26 in Glasgow, and then we passed the baton to Egypt for COP27 this year, and we look forward to COP28 in the UAE next year. I also commend Saudi Arabia and the UAE for their plans to invest nearly $350 billion in green energy, and also to Bahrain for its ambition to double its deployment of renewables by 2035. And I draw inspiration from the Middle East Green Initiative, which will help countries to achieve their nationally determined contributions to reduce carbon emissions. But none of our shared ambition will succeed without security. And the hard truth is that we face an even greater array of threats. In January of this year, I was in the garden of the British ambassador's residence in Abu Dhabi, looking up at the night sky and watching explosions as Houthi rockets were intercepted and shot down overhead. And I can assure you that I gave thanks for the accuracy and the efficiency of the UAE's missile defenses on that evening. Because those trails of light darting across the sky above me were visible evidence of how Iranian-supplied weapons threaten the entire region. Today's Iranian nuclear program is more advanced than ever before, and the regime has resorted to selling Russia the armed drones that are currently killing civilians in Ukraine. As their people demonstrate against decades of oppression, Iran's rulers are spreading bloodshed and destruction across the region and as far away as Kyiv. Britain is determined to work alongside our friends to counter the Iranian threat, interdict the smuggling of conventional arms, and prevent the regime from acquiring nuclear weapons capability. Twice this year, Royal Navy frigates operating in international waters south of Iran intercepted speedboats laden with surface-to-air missiles and engines for cruise missiles. Had those engines reached their destination, they could have powered the type of cruise missiles that bombarded Abu Dhabi on the 17th of January, killing 3 civilians. And the toll would have been even higher without the defenses that I saw in action above the skies of Abu Dhabi just a few weeks later. That is why British forces are striving alongside their counterparts in the region to keep us safe and defend the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity which protect every nation. Every nation. Putin's onslaught against Ukraine amounts to a flagrant breach of the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And no country is immune from the turmoil that he has brought to the world markets or the damage that he has caused to food security. Day after day, Putin's war is inflicting yet more suffering on Syrians and Yemenis, who are already enduring the privations of humanitarian emergency, and he is having an impact on ordinary Lebanese caught up in an economic crisis. And meanwhile, the horrors that he is meting out to Ukrainian civilians compare with the destruction that he and Assad wrought upon Aleppo and other Syrian cities. Yet, despite using overwhelming and pitiless force, Putin is losing. Almost everywhere, Russian forces are in retreat, and it is only a matter of time before Ukraine prevails. And it should be dawning upon other regimes who might be tempted to behave similarly that most of the world is determined to ensure that aggression does not pay. And this region demonstrated its belief in sovereignty and territorial integrity when it voted at the UN General Assembly to condemn Putin's annexation of Ukrainian territory. Just as those principles remain constant, so I fervently believe that Britain's friendship across the Middle East and North Africa will deepen and endure as we uphold peace and security together, and as this region masters its second transformation, allowing a new world of green energy to succeed the old. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Foreign Secretary. Again, from the very beginning of the Manama dialogue, we've had excellent engagement from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It was in 2003, I think I recall, where I took the advice of His Royal Highness Prince Turki bin Faisal on how to mount such an event here in Manama. And I want to invite Waleed al-Khuraiji, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia, to take the floor. Thank you, sir.
In the name of God, Majesties, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace of God be with you. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude and thanks for the efforts paid by the Kingdom of Bahrain to host this forum and to support its works. I would like to thank them for their warm welcome and hospitality. I thank the IISS, headed by its president, Dr. Chipman. It is a great pleasure to be with you today and to convey to you the greetings of His Highness, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and his wishes for success to the Manama dialogue. He was not able to come here because he has an official visit to accompanying the Crown Prince. This kind of gathering is really important. We really need these kinds of fora that encourage dialogue and encourage peaceful conflicts to the threats that are facing our region and the world. The international community is facing collective challenges requiring solidarity and multilateralism. We need the language of dialogue and solidarity facing competition and conflict. And the Saudi diplomacy has always played a constructive role on both the regional and international levels, building bridges of dialogue and working towards the health of the international economy. Majesties, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, within Vision 2030, the Kingdom has ambitions and developmental priorities, prompting it to work diplomatically in order to provide a conducive regional and international environment, a stable one that accepts investments, empowers development, and encourages new international partnerships and strengthens the existing links. So this requires efforts to de-escalate the tensions and to increase good intentions to find peaceful solutions far from any threats and implications of the polarization on the geopolitical level. Within this, we think of the cohesion and of the flows, the trade flows, a free flow for trade and food security. Within this context, the Kingdom works on concerting with the partners and on working collectively to support the economic recovery of the world through through the balance of the energy prices, and the kingdom will keep its leadership role that it has always played recently, so it will remain a trustworthy and safe source for energy for the world. So the kingdom recently showed that it deals with energy within a comprehensive approach, giving importance to the commitments at the international level and facing all the climate change and problems and challenges. This is why we have launched both initiatives, Green Saudi Arabia and Green Middle East, and we have increased our NDCs to the double by 2030. We hope to reach carbon neutrality of GHGs by 2060 through the implementation of the carbon circular economy. The kingdom is also setting institutional arrangements to supervise different national and regional programs in order to achieve all these objectives. We're talking about all these efforts because we want to reaffirm the importance that we give to climate change, for it to go in par with the transformation towards renewable energy and diversified energy sources. The kingdom sees that this energy transformation relies on three main pillars. One, energy security, economic development and prosperity for the populations, and dealing with climate change, taking into consideration all its aspects. This is why the kingdom invests in all energy sources. So, for it to be able to live up to the requirements at the international level from consumers and producers, and to stay far from the bad repercussions of unrealistic policies of reducing emissions, leading to putting apart the main sources of energy, not taking into consideration the economic and developmental impacts of such a policy. Highnesses, Excellencies, we have seen recently that the geopolitical conflicts are not only limited to the conflicting parties. This overspills on the other countries that are not directly linked to it. And this has repercussions on the food security, on the energy security, and their development. I would like to remind you that the recovery from COVID-19 was possible because we de-escalated tensions and we worked on the multilateral solidarity and cooperation. And for us to be able to reach sustainable economic recovery, we need to enable peaceful solutions and work on good intentions for us to be able to face all these common challenges that are overwhelming the world, because the world is hostage of geopolitical competition and polarization, and all the regions are now being dragged into these conflicts, thus having its repercussions on the societies, the economy, and the developing countries are the most suffering. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Deputy Foreign Minister. Let me again remind everybody the rules of the road for this Q&A session, which is that you put your badge into the microphone and you press the speak button. But that just means that your microphone is illuminated. It doesn't mean your microphone is on, so you can still perhaps safely whisper the odd indiscretion to your neighbor. It's only when I actually call you and put your microphone on that it will operate. So I've got a number of people already in the queue, which is splendid. What I'm going to do is take 6 or 7 comments and remarks on the floor and then come back to the panel. So if each of you were to take a note of the question that is principally directed to you, that would be excellent. I'll try to help from my end as well. To begin our debate, Hassan Al-Hassan from Bahrain.
Thank you very much, John. And thank you to the guests and the speakers. My question is to their excellencies, the representatives of Kuwait and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. You spoke eloquently, especially Your Excellency Sheikh Abdullah Al-Sabah, of the urgency with which the world needs to both address climate change, but also ensure that short-term energy needs are met. The emergence of technological nationalism, the tendency to weaponize technology, set up barriers to the circulation of technology, poses a grave threat, a grave risk and threat to the ability of the Gulf states to tap and develop fully their clean energy potential. What strategies do you intend to use to be able to mitigate the risk of technological nationalism and to be able to overcome those barriers to acquiring the technology that we need in order to fully transition into the clean energy sector? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the UK, Bill Emmett.
Thank you very much, Director General. Thank you to all of the panel for a very stimulating opening to the day. A fundamental shift in geopolitics of energy has, of course, been also the decline of a traditional market, the United States, to become a major producer, and the emergence of Asian markets, particularly China, as major consumers of energy, leading to something of a shift in attention, naturally, of this region to the east. On February the 4th of this year, Russia and China signed a joint statement about changing nature of international relations, accusing your former allies of being essentially threats to world peace and threats to the multilateral system. I wonder if I could ask the panel, all of the panel, to reflect upon how the February the 4th joint statement between Russia and China has changed the geopolitics of energy and of your diplomacy in this region.
Thank you very much. And from the United Arab Emirates, Yahya Al-Marzouki.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. My question is not so much directed, but perhaps to the panelists, but perhaps more to John. Yesterday and today, we see there's a festival of thinker here, and we see the decision maker all congregated in Manama. John, do you envisage having a Manama declaration by which, perhaps sponsored by UN, by which one or two items are agreed, signed, and we can follow up in the following year and see how we execute and implement them?
Thank you. I think I might take that at the end, but it's an interesting point as to how we organize this dialogue. Could I ask from Kuwait, Amna Ibrahim?
Hello. My question is about the regional geopolitics as they relate to the energy transition. So when it comes to the European states, we've seen a lot of investment in cooperative energy policy making. However, in the Gulf, even when it comes to our electricity, we have a common grid, but that's not fully shared at all times. And those are political decisions behind that power sharing. And that's only electricity. So then when we imagine very large investment in diversification, we require a high level of GCC cooperation. What effort is being put in to kind of remove barriers between Gulf states in order to really push forward energy policy in the region?
Thank you so much. And from the Netherlands, Maya Nowens.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the speakers. My question is for Secretary of State Cleverly. China has a monopoly on rare earth minerals that are critical to the development of energy transition technologies. How do you ensure that we can continue to cooperate with China and prevent the weaponization of this type of supply chain control? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll take one more in this round before reverting to the panel. Robert Ward from the United Kingdom.
Thank you, John, and thank you, panel. A question for the panel. With the oil price cap due to be launched next month, what does the panel think will be the long-term structural impact on the oil market of the policy, given that the G7 still account for around 30% of global GDP, and how effective will the policy be? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have technological nationalism, Russia and China February 4th statement, GCC grid, rare earths, and oil price mechanism. Not all three panelists have to answer all 6 questions, but you know which ones were principally directed to you. For the one directed to me on whether we would aim ever to have a Manama communique, we saw at formal meetings like the G20 just in Bali quite how much diplomatic effort had to go to get a communique out. And we think that to spend all the time negotiating a statement that the 45 countries represented here could adhere to might be an excessive challenge. On the other hand, as I said in my introduction, quite often real diplomatic business takes place here. So it was in 2014 that the United Kingdom and Bahrain signed here at the Manama Dialogue in the evening at about 11:30 p.m. opposite the Naval Facilities Agreement. And I know of a lot of bilateral and trilateral and other arrangements that have been made during the course of the Manama Dialogue. And indeed, if we're able to ensure the Manama Dialogue becomes, as it were, an action-forcing event for similar diplomatic engagement as between the participants voluntarily, that would be splendid. But to negotiate a communique during the weekend might be a bit tough. So I've answered the question directed to me. Could I go in the order that the panelists spoke with their responses? Sheikh Salem first. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. I'd like to tackle the first question about tech nationalism. So I'm going to take you all back to 1991 when my country was liberated from the Iraqi invasion. Do you all remember the fires that were set ablaze on our oil fields? There were 700 some very, very damaging oil fires going on there. The point I want to make is that at that time, black snow fell on the Himalayas because of the soot from the oil fires. So when we talk about tech nationalism, I mean, that does not make any sense to me. Take a look at our globe. I mean, our Earth, our blue Earth, has a very thin layer of oxygen around it. Now, who has a monopoly on that? Look, if one country is clean and another country across the globe is not, the first country is not clean. We share one environment. We share one atmosphere. We share one planet. How does it make sense to have tech nationalism? Doesn't make sense at all. We all have to work together. We all have to share our tech. We all have to share our expertise. Or I have news for you. It's not going to work. Country A can be very, very clean, can be zero emission, zero carbon footprint. If a country next door is not zero carbon footprint, country A is not going to be zero. So, I mean, that to me is a very obvious question. If we don't work together, it's not going to work, period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James Cleverly.
Thank you. A couple of questions there that I think have a natural linkage to each other. The question, I think, on the shifting relationship between the world in light of the agreement between Russia and China ahead of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think that has seen a shift as China becomes a much greater consumer of electricity or consumer of energy. I think that has brought about a change. The UK published its integrated review of security foreign policy recently, and that talks about the Indo-Pacific tilt. So we will have an increased focus on the Indo-Pacific. I want to make it very clear to our very good friends in the room today that that does not mean that we are going to be dropping our long-standing, pre-existing friendships both here in the region and elsewhere. But it does mean that we have to have an increased focus on that part of the world and particularly on China, which leads on to the question that was asked about cornering the market and rare earth minerals and what our response to that is. Of course, we do need to continue to have a commercial and trading relationship with China. As I say, China is one of the UK's largest trading partners. I'm sure that's true with many other countries represented in the room. But the lesson that I think we take from Russia's use of gas supplies as a tool of leverage is that it would be foolish and short-sighted if we were to try and break our dependence on hydrocarbons, which can be used, and as we have seen Russia doing, can be used as leverage on the international stage, only to then be completely dependent perhaps on components for wind turbines or photovoltaic cells or battery storage to another country. I think there are a number of things that we need to do with regard to that. I think we need to use technology. I was in Strathclyde University recently looking at sodium-ion batteries, which use a much more bountiful, much more plentiful, much cheaper, much easier to source material for those batteries. I think we also see that whilst China does have a huge dominance when it comes to the processing of those minerals, the actual dispersal of those minerals around the globe is much broader. And if there were processing capabilities in other parts of the world, particularly in Africa, where many of those minerals are found, I think that would be good for the African economies. I think it would be good for global energy security, and I think that diversification of production, I think, would be a much more healthy situation. I think I'll leave it there and give time for other people to answer the other elements of those questions.
Thanks. Deputy Foreign Minister?
Well, I'm not an expert in energy, okay, but I will try just to send some messages, As you know, Saudi Arabia is always the, what they call it, trusted source of energy, We're trying to go through a transformation to make Saudi Arabia as a hub of traditional energy and the new form, which we already started, okay? We're cooperating with the rest of the world. You cannot do things by yourself, And the COVID-19 have proven to us that in time of crisis, that all of us should work together. If we don't work together, we will not reach anywhere. Nowadays, we have what they call it, some issues, especially, food supply, okay, which we have seen, with the cooperation of the UN and different countries, we start to have some results. And we have seen that, for example, food prices start to go down. So cooperation is very important, and I'm quite sure that we all learn from the lessons of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, we've got time for another round of about 6 interventions before I come back to the panel to conclude just before 10:15. So could I ask Bastian Giegowitz from Germany?
John, thank you very much, and thank you to all these speakers. I have a question for Secretary of State Cleverly. Sir, you spoke about Iranian weapons being supplied to Russia and used for attack in Ukraine. Another area where Russia might benefit from Iran is in learning how to circumvent sanctions. And President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, yesterday spoke about the need to deal with this issue. And I think she said those who are circumventing sanctions might themselves need to be listed. So I wonder what your view is on this issue of how can we deal with this issue of sanctions circumventions. Thank you.
Thank you. And from the US, Basma Halawi-Ro.
Thank you. My question for the Secretary of State. Sir, I quote you. You say this morning that your security is our security. And you talk about Houthi attack in Abu Dhabi. They also attack Saudi Arabia energy facility. Yet, there is no severe action against the Houthi threat. So how can you assure your partners and ally that you will protect their security? Thank you.
Thank you. And from the UK, Adel Hamezi.
Thank you, John. Just if I could add some color to two earlier questions around the price cap. If I could just push Minister Cleverly to maybe touch on what sticking points around G7 discussions and negotiations are around the price cap, more specifically outside of shipping, brokering, financial services, and to add to and complement, supplement, consolidate, and push the point around sanctions, navigational circumvention. When thinking about the Russia, Iraq, Iran, China corridor, and what conversations are going on with the likes of India on a potential price cap that most IOC CEOs think is folly or very difficult to push. And just to bring in the elephant in the room, if I may, it'd be great if Minister Khuraiji could just say a little bit about lessons learned perhaps from the communication dislocation with the recent US-Saudi spat, or whatever we want to call it, after the OPEC meeting last month. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And since you mentioned India, Asif Shuja from India.
Thank you so much. My question is to the minister from Saudi Arabia. We are talking about the changing geopolitics of energy. United States has taken Saudi Arabia as the largest producer of the world. OPEC stands for oil producing and exporting countries, but still United States is not a member of either OPEC or OPEC+. Would there be a solution to this problem if United States is inducted as OPEC+ member? Would it help in the disseminating some of the problems that United States and Saudi Arabia has been facing? Thank you.
Thank you. A call for an inclusive OPEC plus arrangement then. Thomas Beckett.
Thank you. Some observers are predicting that Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its use of energy as a weapon against Europe will lead to accelerated transition to renewables. So my question to the panel, but particularly to those in OPEC, are the major producers umbrellaed under OPEC Plus motivated by either making hay while the sun shines, getting as many dollars as they can, or exercising strategic diversification by supporting Russia in the belief that it will prevail in the illegal invasion?
Thank you. And Nick Crawford.
Thank you, John. In her keynote speech yesterday evening, Ursula von der Leyen highlighted the role that the Gulf states have to play in providing clean fuels, including hydrogen, to Europe in future. So what concrete steps can be taken between Gulf states and governments in Europe, North America, and elsewhere to cement new relationships around these clean fuels? How can they create a more predictable environment for investments in this area? How can European governments be better friends to the Gulf states in the energy transition more generally?
Thank you very much. I think it probably is time to come back to the panel, and I might invite each of the panelists to answer that array of questions, but perhaps if they want to add anything fresh also from their own point of view to help us conclude this panel, that would be excellent. I think it was correct to read into Ursula von der Leyen's speech yesterday the fact that the European Union might be considering secondary sanctions against states that might be helping Russia to evade them. The EU for 30 years has been complaining about US extraterritorial sanctions and secondary sanctions, but I sensed in the words uttered by Ursula von der Leyen the idea that maybe the EU, as they developed the sharper tools of economic statecraft, might have to enter this field too. And another issue that has been in the debate that would also be an innovation is whether those countries that have seized Russian state assets, freezed Russian state assets, might move to seizing those Russian state assets to create the basis of an Ukrainian redevelopment fund. 300 billion would go a little bit of the way for those reconstructions. So there's a theme around economic statecraft here that I think has also been raised by our participants. Sheikh Salem.
Thank you, Dr. Chairman. I'd like to address the question before last about the OPEC Plus question, rather. That intervention had two questions, and my answer to those two questions is no and no. So I don't know why it's so hard for people to understand that the OPEC Plus decision was purely made on economic grounds. We did not take that decision to make more money, and we did not take that decision rather to support Russia. We took that decision to ensure stability in the oil market. So to the person that asked that question, I'd like to pose a question to you. How would you feel if there was a lot of insecurity in the oil market come next year, with prices all over the place and supply unpredictable? How would you feel? We in OPEC Plus and OPEC, we took a very smart decision based on economic numbers to ensure stability in the oil market. And it's beyond me why we have to keep coming back to this point and stressing it. We have a responsibility as oil-producing countries. We have a responsibility to the producers and consumers. We don't like instability in the oil market. We don't like unpredictability in the oil market. We work together as a group to ensure that the oil market is stable. And that's what we did. Thank you.
Thank you. James Cleverly.
Thank you. I find myself about to repeat words here that I've often said at the dispatch box in Parliament in the UK with regard to my discomfort in speculating or predicting what future sanctions designations might be. But I think there are some broader points to consider. Firstly, what we have learned is that sanctions are most effective when they are internationally coordinated. And so we listen with great interest to the points that were made by Ursula von der Leyen in terms of the coordinated sanctions approach to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And of course, the circumvention of sanctions is something that has to be dealt with internationally and through international cooperation. The point I would make is that we have seen, and His Excellency spoke about Kuwait's invasion and the liberation of Kuwait. And I remind people, and I do this often, and that this is about protecting territorial integrity. This is about protecting the UN Charter. This is about protecting the importance of national sovereignty. And that's why the UK and others have been so passionate in our support of Ukraine, just as we worked with our international partners to liberate Kuwait in its time of need when it found itself under attack. And I think that's incredibly important to restate. It's not because it is a conflict in the European sphere. It is because it is a conflict which attacks some of the very foundations of peace and stability that we have enjoyed for a number of decades. And then that brings me on to the conversations about the oil price cap and the energy price caps that we are, a number of countries are negotiating, particularly European countries, is that whilst we do want to obviously continue to support Ukraine in defense of itself, we are also feeling the economic ripple effect of that conflict, and we look to protect our own consumers, and we look to protect stability and predictability in the hydrocarbon energy market. We try to do these things simultaneously, and they are not easy, and they do require a huge amount of international cooperation. But we want to make sure that we are supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes for this conflict to come to a conclusion. And that does mean also ensuring that we have an economically sustainable position in the UK, whilst also, of course, making sure that Russia is not profiting from the turmoil that it's created. And that is complicated. That is complicated. It reinforces the need for international cooperation. And the final point that I was making, which hadn't come up through questions, but it is a point I do very much want to make, is that we recognize the impact on food security. And I've said that food security, energy security, physical security are all interwoven. And we're seeing some of the hungriest people in the world being plunged into even greater hunger because of disruptions to grain exports through the Black Sea. So this conflict in the European sphere is having an impact on people right across the globe, including some of the hungriest people in the world. And again, it brings me back to the point I've repeated a number of times. All our responses to this require us to work closely with our international partners. And that's why I'm very, very pleased that we are here, very, very pleased that you're able to convene this meeting today.
James, thank you very much. Maybe can I just ask a follow-up question, because you made the point about food security and also mentioned the Indo-Pacific tilt. Of course, Europeans and North Americans who talk about the Indo-Pacific tilt talk about the need to assure free and open Indo-Pacific. Their credibility in making that case would be all the stronger if those same countries were able to ensure a free and open Black Sea. And there's been some good fortune recently in the UN and Turkish, Ukrainian, Russian negotiations to allow a certain amount of food to go out, but perhaps not as much as would in normal times. Has there been any discussion with the foreign ministers that you are often in contact with as to whether there might be an emerging need to have a freedom of navigation patrol, a humanitarian mission, forcibly to open the Black Sea so that the pace of those exports would be all the greater?
Well, look, we have to keep an open mind as to what mechanisms that we use, but I do think we also need to be very cautious about the implications. And we have, I'm often finding myself being asked about no-fly zones, protection of navigation corridors, humanitarian corridors. And the point I'd always make is if you're talking about a no-fly zone or a naval corridor or a humanitarian land corridor, they have to be enforced. And enforced means force. And that brings us to the question about what is our appetite to engage directly, force on force, with countries that might try and close those routes. And in this instance, the conversation that you're talking about, we're talking about Russia. And we've made it very clear, it's for the Ukrainians to defend themselves against Russian aggression. This is not a wider conflict between the West and Russia. Russia has chosen to attack Ukraine. We will support Ukraine, but we have never, when I say we, NATO, the UK, our friends and allies, we have never threatened Russia. We are not threatening Russia. The problems that Russia is facing is a direct result of Russian aggression against Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Waleed al-Khuraiji.
Well, I think for the decision of OPEC Plus, His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Kuwait, have already answered that the decision was made on a technical base. There was no politics behind that decision. And Saudi Arabia already cleared that since the beginning, okay? And it was a decision by 21 countries, not only by one country. I think there was a question about joining of the US to the OPEC Plus, okay? I think this question should be directed to the US itself, okay? For sure, this is a new idea, but it's always, we accept to discuss new ideas, and we can see if there would be much ease, for them to join the OPEC Plus, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to do two things? First, stay in the room because we don't have a coffee break between now and the second plenary, which will start in about 4 minutes, on the impact of extra-regional conflicts on Middle East security. And the second thing I would ask you all to do is to thank all of our participants and panelists in the usual way. Thank you.